Now, final presentation we decided to make last because all of these will not get anywhere if there isn't good governance and if we don't eliminate the big bad wolf called corruption. And for that, the chair was Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. His presenter is Mr. Franklin Kujo. Dr. Akwete, the chair himself, will come and lead that discussion. Put your hands together for Doc, who is the Executive Director and founder of IDEG, and he's been in this space for many, many years. Let's welcome Dr. Emmanuel Akwete one more time. Thank you, Doc. Put it all together for us.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of us. May I start by acknowledging that the presenters who have preceded have raised the bar so high, especially when your time is up, but you don't stick to it. I intend to follow that good example, and I hope you wouldn't mind. Sorry, my apologies. Your Excellency, Madam Vice President, Honorable Minister of Finance, the chairperson and members of the organizing group for this event, fellow Ghanaians, all protocols observed. Our group, the sixth in line, was tasked to see how we can restore good governance and eliminate corruption in Ghana. I think it would take a lot of fasting beyond 40 days to sort out how this can be done, given the time we have. Nonetheless, I think it's a great opportunity given to us to look at what the issues are. We looked at three key issues, which we derived from the President's State of the Nation address, but even before that, he had also spoken about them. He's been talking about three priorities, the first of which is constitutional reforms and the recommendations. And his second point has been retrieving looted resources and recommendations. Then, of course, economic growth and maybe sustaining that on an even keel in his tenure. Because there has been two or so groups looking at this third item, we decided to focus on constitutional reforms and the recommendations and retrieving looted resources and recommendations. I think the legacy the President seeks lies within all three, but these two are those we can comment on. And the reason is simple. The President has 4 years of tenure. And as we know, the 4 years are not all for policy. I think the maximum that he can do is to ensure that 2.5 years of the 4 will be strictly based on the reforms that he wants to pursue. We do not regulate electoral politics very much. And I'm afraid that the 4 years he has, internal party elections of the two major parties could be disruptive, especially when they get into the third year. And in that case, focusing, getting all of us, his MPs, the opposition party, and all focused on delivering the reform agenda would be difficult. So this is something that confronts us, and that begs the question, how do we ensure, is it even realistic that we can deliver constitutional reforms within this interval? The realistic question comes up because just as the President read the State of the Nation, he also said something that is different from what he had said earlier, contesting the elections. In contesting the elections, the focus of the reform, especially when he mentioned election of MMDCs, he made it clear that his party, in fact, reading his party manifestos, they were interested in electing MMDCs, but have not made arrangements for political parties to participate in that, because that takes us to a different clause in the Constitution. That's the difference between the entrenched and the non-entrenched. But in the State of the Nation, he also said, well, if there are clauses entrenched, they can also be opened up. So that changes the scenario. It's like taking us back to 2018 or 2019 when we were trying to also open local government to political parties, plus other things that would come. But it's a bold decision he has made, and I think it's important we see how best they can be pursued. So with a view to this difficult situation, how are we going to manage these processes, party behavior, and all the concentration we need on supporting the election, the implementation of the priorities he has laid? I think 2.5 years or 2.5 years to do reforms is going to be extremely difficult. But we have to see how best civil society and other groups could work with them to achieve it. Now, as I thought about these things, it's clear that if we take the two reforms, we must look at what is strategic and how we can execute that. So we decided to look at the constitutional reforms. And we wanted to look at constitutional reforms not so much in the election of MMDCs, because he's opened that already, but we wanted to look at how he could secure the funding and the processes to implement the important goals he has set for the nation. We looked at, if we're looking at local government, the Common Fund Administrator's powers, we asked ourselves, should it be reviewed to ensure efficient resource allocation consistent with national development priorities? Because we are told that the funds, and I wouldn't say only his government, in previous governments, the funds going to the districts has been challenging. How could we achieve this? Do we have scope for reforms to achieve this? There is also the question of Public Procurement Act, which is strengthening the implementation of the Public Procurement Act, which is essential to deal with inefficient and non-adherence to the law. We also looked at resource allocation. Government institutions must be adequately resourced, and state-owned enterprises should undergo strict performance assessment to ensure efficiency and accountability performances. These are the priorities on the table. And as we looked at them, unless we all come together to support the president, if it were possible not to focus on our political divisions, but take the period as we've elected the president, a national president, and we are supporting the policies that he would implement to improve the quality of governance and economic and social conditions in the country, that would be ideal. But there is a disruptive mechanism which no one has been able to control. And that is how the parties behave differently, focus more on the next elections. So, in looking at constitutional reforms, we think there's the need to strengthen governance systems to ensure full compliance with existing laws and regulations in line with Chapter 24 of the 1992 Constitution. There is also the need for verification of declared assets by the Auditor General. I think the President has set the standard. He's the first, probably the first in the Fourth Republic to publish or announce that he has, and we all saw it on TV. But we think that all other public officers should do. However, it is not clear whether this will be made public so that the assessments can be done also by the citizens they are representing in the high offices of state they are handling. The second is how to decouple Parliament from the executive. It is essential to decouple parliamentary functions from the executive branch to promote checks and balances in governance. But we have a situation where, in this time, the governing party has the greatest majority. And therefore, that had influenced, to me, although the manifesto spoke about electing MMDCs without parties much earlier. But the situation we have clearly shows that the governing party that has the majority and has been able to secure probably an absolute majority if you add the 4 candidates to its agenda to push reforms, could do it his way. That would be difficult or maybe not what we should push, because it could end up intensifying divisions. Constitutional reforms require consensus, even if it's not the entrenched, which requires, 75% of a yes vote, whereas when you are looking at the non-entrenched, 2/3 majority, and that they have already. But if we set that precedent, it might also create problems for reforms that requires that the parties come together to get them through. So we need to look at this extremely carefully and see whether there will be other means of not leaving the two parties, the minority and the majority as we see them today, but probably if there's a state mechanism that could get them to reason through, build consensus, so we do not see the politics of we have the majority, we'll do what we like, which is on both sides anyway when they're in power. So there is an issue there to look at, because it's a tit-for-tat game in most cases, but we need to persuade the other side and probably mobilize the public to see how their members of parliament could explain to them the kind of reforms being undertaken and why it's in the national interest rather than the partisan interest. The second is the robust campaign financing regime. There's a pressing need for a robust campaigning finance regime, because I don't know who amongst our parties have been prompt in accounting for what they spent in elections. Not the two parties. Well, because Madam Vice President is looking at me, I wouldn't mention the names, but you know the two parties. Accountability for party expenditure and so on is not with EC. EC, when it goes out against this, is often with the smaller parties, and they are not even in parliament. So there is an issue here. How do we look at parliament's executive relationships in terms of the agenda the elected president and his party with the absolute majority, so to speak, wants to execute? How would we engage in a conversation in the national interest? It is something we would have to find a way of doing. The second major issue has to do with retrieving looted resources, which is the major point of the president. We've thought about this. We are asking ourselves, who are those to do it? Based on the data they have, would it be anti-corruption institutions? Would it be the police? Would it be foot soldiers? How are we going to handle it so we do not get into a very difficult political situation where violence could probably happen? We are hoping that there will be a lot of public education and explanation, because we can't also deny that there is public support for recovering what others call the loot, and bringing back funds into the system to enable the government deliver its promises. We think that the anti-corruption institutions could help. We should first set up a framework and infrastructure to assist recovery management and accountability. I don't know if any of the parties have thought through this, but nobody expected this report. Well, I can't say nobody expected the results of the elections, the landslide, and so on. But I think how are we going to do this becomes an important issue that needs to be discussed, and what mobilization. But it could be well done. Are we going to look at anti-corruption institutions like YOCO? I think YOCO is already undergoing some changes. Can we look at funding mechanisms, independent bodies, the anti-corruption groups, civil society? How would they work with the statutory institutions of the state under the law? There's a lot to be done, and strengthening financial oversight. This, to us, are important issues that we ought to think through and come out quickly to educate the public on how best they will be executed. But I think the last point here that we wish to put forward is that if we are not able to come to some negotiations on how probably we shouldn't run the electoral system that has no effective controls, it will be extremely destructive, or what I want to say, it would divert attention from the reforms. And the elections ahead of us, 2028, probably might be what drives the process. And in that case, I think we have to find the ways in which some consensus can be built without playing the parliamentary game alone, so that the tit for tat is not the way to do the most effective way of reforming our system in the interest of all. We think these two proposals we have, if seriously considered, would probably help us undertake reforms. But most of all, because the entrenched provision is now admissible from the President's SONA statement, it's like taking us back to what we tried to do in 2019, when election of MMDCs, political parties can participate, and that in the NDC manifesto for 2025 elections was a no-go area. So the implication is, now that the President says we can open reforms to entrenched provisions, how will the parties work? Because it's a consensus-driven thing, whether you have the majority or not. And how would you work together in mobilizing the public to support a process that will be in the interest of the nation if we can reform? These are some of the questions we've pondered over, but we think promoting good governance between 2025 and 2028 will require much more than the majority position, and it would also require a lot of patience in building and cultivating consensus, and we need institutions to do this. I'm not sure whether we've worked on these things. I'll end it here.
You gave the impression you were going to spend much longer. So we're all surprised you finished so soon.
I picked many of the things in hours that have been said already, and didn't want to repeat them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Put your hands together for him. Thank you very much indeed. Please, just like to thank all the committees. First, let me just ask the Good Governance Committee to rise, so we acknowledge all of them. The Good Governance Anti-Corruption Committee, where are you? Thank you. We see them a lot at the back.